She married a simple guy in anger, then discovered he's a billionaire CEO. Rosaline's hands trembled as she gripped the edge of the table in the crowded Chicago restaurant. Her black dress clung to her frame, but she barely noticed. Across from her sat Joseph, the man she thought she knew, the man who wore dusty jeans, flannel shirts, and smelled of fresh wood from his workshop. But tonight, his calm voice shattered everything she believed. "Rosaline," he said, looking straight into her eyes, "there's something I have to tell you. My name isn't just Joseph. It's Joseph Evans. And I'm not just a carpenter. I'm the CEO of a billion-dollar company." The chatter of diners faded into silence in her mind. Her heart pounded as she stared at him, searching his face for any sign this was a joke. But his steady gaze told her it was real. The man she had married, thinking he was ordinary, had just revealed a truth that could change everything. What would you do if you discovered the person you married was secretly a billionaire? Tell us in the comments where you're watching from, and don't forget to subscribe. Tomorrow we're dropping another story you won't want to miss. Your support helps us bring you more powerful stories. Chicago had a way of showing off its strength. Towering buildings, endless traffic, and people who moved as though every second was a test of success. Rosaline Vanderbilt fit right into this rhythm. She was in her late 20s, confident, stylish, and ambitious. With her sharp features framed by shoulder-length dark hair, she carried herself as though the city belonged to her. By day, she worked as a graphic designer at one of the top firms downtown. By night, she was part of a social scene that thrived on appearances, cocktail parties on rooftops, networking events at luxury hotels, and endless conversations about deals, promotions, and vacations. Her last name, Vanderbilt, always sparked curiosity. People assumed she was tied to the old money family, and while it wasn't true, Rosaline often allowed the assumption to linger. It gave her a slight edge in a world that judged people by status. Her boyfriend, Chadwick "Chad" Remington III, embodied everything this world demanded. Tall, broad-shouldered, and always dressed in tailored suits, he moved through life like he owned it. His family's wealth stretched back generations, and he never let anyone forget it. He drove a red Ferrari, wore watches worth more than most people's yearly rent, and talked casually about vacation homes in the Hamptons as if they were no big deal. To outsiders, he was the dream match for Rosaline, wealth meeting ambition. For Rosaline, dating Chad was like winning entry into an exclusive club. He introduced her to clients she would never have met otherwise, and she found herself seated at tables where million-dollar deals were discussed. But beneath the surface, cracks were already there. Chad rarely asked about her work. When she shared the excitement of completing a design project, he often dismissed it as cute. His world revolved around acquisitions, profit margins, and maintaining a spotless social image. The breaking point came on an autumn evening at one of Chicago's most talked-about restaurants in the West Loop. Rosaline had been looking forward to the night for weeks. She had prepared a quiet dinner at home, hoping to have a serious talk about their future, but Chad insisted they eat out instead. The restaurant buzzed with loud music, waiters rushing between tables, and plates of artfully decorated meals that looked more like museum pieces than food. Rosaline sat across from Chad, her heart racing with anticipation. She was ready to talk about marriage, about building something together. But Chad had his own agenda. Between bites of expensive appetizers, he leaned back in his chair and spoke with the confidence of someone making a business announcement rather than sharing his feelings. "Rosaline," he began, "you're amazing. You really are. But we need to be realistic. My family expects certain things from me. They've invested too much in building a legacy for me to ignore it. She frowned. What does that mean, Chad? He gave a smooth smile, the kind that had charmed so many, but to Rosaline it felt hollow. It means you'd have to let go of, well, your little design job. Cute as it is, it doesn't exactly fit the life we're building. I'd need you to focus on managing our social calendar, our image. Think of it as a promotion. You'd be my partner in appearances. The words hit her like a slap. Little design job. Every late night, every deadline she had met, every ounce of creativity she poured into her work, all reduced to a hobby in his eyes. Her voice trembled with anger. You want me to quit my career so I can decorate your life like an accessory? Don't take it the wrong way, Chad replied smoothly. You'll never find what I can offer you with some ordinary guy. You're too smart to settle for that. The air between them grew heavy. For Rosaline, this wasn't just a disagreement, it was a revelation. Chad didn't love her for who she was. He loved her for how she fit into the picture he wanted to paint for the world. She pushed back her chair, her appetite gone. If that's what you think of me, then maybe this isn't what I want after all. Chad barely looked fazed. He shrugged, sipping his drink. You'll see in time. No simple man will ever understand your world. You'll come back. Rosaline left the restaurant that night feeling humiliated and furious. The cold Chicago wind stung her face as she walked along the riverwalk. The skyline glittered above her, each tower a reminder of the world she had tried so hard to belong to. But Chad's words echoed louder than the city around her. No simple man will ever understand you. They weren't just words of arrogance. To Rosaline, they felt like a prophecy she was determined to prove wrong. Rosaline didn't go home after walking out of the restaurant. She wandered the streets of Chicago for hours, anger burning in her chest. Chad's voice wouldn't leave her head. No simple man will ever understand your world. It wasn't just arrogance, it was a challenge. A part of her wanted to scream, another part wanted to prove him wrong, and in that moment, anger clouded her judgment. Late that night, sitting on her couch with a half-empty glass of wine, she opened her phone. For months she had mocked a dating app her friend used, one that promised genuine connections, for people who loved the outdoors and simple living. Normally, Rosaline would have rolled her eyes at the idea. But tonight was different. Tonight, she wanted the opposite of Chad. She created a quick profile and began swiping. She skipped over men in suits, men in flashy cars, and men who bragged about their income. Instead, she stopped on a profile that felt almost too plain. His name was Joseph. His photos showed him smiling with crinkled eyes, standing on a hiking trail, repairing a wooden canoe, and holding a mug of coffee on a porch. No luxury brands, no polished settings, just a man who seemed real. His bio read, "I like quiet mornings, good coffee, and building things with my hands. Carpenter. Based in Ravenswood." Rosaline stared at the profile for a long time. He was everything Chad wasn't. And that was exactly what she wanted. Without overthinking, she swiped right. The match came almost instantly. Within minutes, Joseph sent her a message. "Hi Rosaline. Your smile looks warm. Would you like to grab coffee sometime?" Their first date was at a small cafe in Andersonville, far from the glamorous spots Rosaline usually frequented. The cafe smelled of fresh pastries and espresso, its wooden chairs mismatched and worn. Joseph was waiting for her when she arrived, wearing a simple button-down shirt and jeans. His presence was calm, almost grounding. From the moment they sat down, the difference between him and Chad was clear. Joseph asked questions and listened, genuinely interested in her work as a designer. He didn't brush it aside or make her feel small. When she asked about his carpentry, his eyes lit up. He spoke about the texture of oak, the patience it took to restore old homes, and how creating something with his hands gave him peace. Rosaline found herself smiling, really smiling, for the first time in weeks. She didn't have to fight for his attention, didn't have to prove her worth. Their conversation flowed naturally, and when they parted, Joseph walked her to her car without any flashy lines, just a simple, "I'd like to see you again if you'd like that too." Over the next 2 months, they grew close. Their dates were nothing like the high society outings she once shared with Chad. With Joseph, it was picnics in Lincoln Park, walks along the 606 trail, evenings cooking dinner together, and quiet laughter over board games. He didn't drive a Ferrari, his truck was old but dependable. He didn't wear tailored suits, most days he wore flannel and boot. But his honesty and steadiness filled a void she hadn't realized was there. Still, a small part of Rosaline knew she was acting out of rebellion. Each time she looked at Joseph's kind, unassuming smile, she thought of Chad's smug words and felt satisfied that she had chosen differently. It wasn't just love she was chasing. It was a statement, proof to herself and to Chad that she could build a life outside his world. Joseph, however, didn't seem to be caught up in that battle. He was steady, thoughtful, and straightforward. After only 2 months, on a quiet evening at his apartment, he surprised her. Over a homemade dinner of roasted chicken and vegetables, Joseph put down his fork, took her hand, and asked, "Rosaline, I don't have much, but I know what I want. I want a life with you. Will you marry me?" The words stopped her. It wasn't a grand proposal on a rooftop with champagne. There was no diamond ring the size of a marble. It was just Joseph, looking at her with sincerity. Rosaline hesitated for a heartbeat, then remembered Chad's cruel dismissal. A spark of defiance lit inside her. She said yes. A few weeks later, they stood together at the Chicago Cultural Center. Instead of a grand wedding with hundreds of guests, it was a small civil ceremony. The Tiffany dome overhead glowed with soft light as they exchanged vows in front of only a handful of witnesses. There were no photographers, no lavish reception, just a quiet promise. For their honeymoon, Joseph suggested Paris or Bora Bora, but not the way Chad would have. He simply asked where she wanted to go. Rosaline, still caught up in the excitement of doing the opposite of everything Chad valued, agreed when Joseph suggested camping in Michigan's Upper Peninsula. They pitched a tent in the Porcupine Mountains, hiked during the day, and fell asleep at night to the sound of crickets and wind rustling through the trees. For a while, Rosaline convinced herself she had found peace. The simplicity was refreshing, the lack of judgment freeing. But beneath the calm, questions lingered. She couldn't shake the thought that maybe she had rushed into a life that wasn't fully hers. Back in Chicago, reality settled in faster than Rosaline expected. Married life with Joseph was nothing like the whirlwind courtship that had swept her into saying yes. Their tiny apartment in Ravenswood was warm but modest, decorated mostly with Joseph's handcrafted furniture. The coffee table bore marks of chisels, the shelves held books she had never read, and the bed frame creaked slightly with every movement, but Joseph had built them all with his hands. At first, Rosaline found it charming. After years of being around people who measured their worth in money, Joseph's world felt grounded. She would return from long days at her graphic design firm, exhausted from deadlines and demanding clients, and Joseph would be there, smiling, dinner ready, always asking how her day went. Yet as weeks turned into months, cracks began to appear. Joseph loved his carpentry workshop more than anything. It was tucked away in an old warehouse on the north side, filled with the smell of sawdust and the hum of power tools. He poured hours into crafting custom tables, restoring antique chairs, and experimenting with new designs. He was proud of his work, even if the income was modest. Rosaline admired his passion, but the difference between their lives gnawed at her. Her office world was sleek and competitive, fast-paced presentations, high-paying clients, networking events where appearances mattered. His world was slow, deliberate, and, in her eyes, limited. They started arguing about money first. One evening, she came home frustrated after a meeting where her boss rejected her pitch. Joseph greeted her with excitement, holding up a finished oak cabinet he had spent days working on. "Isn't it beautiful?" he asked, smiling proudly. Rosaline glanced at it, then sighed. "It is, but how much are you selling it for?" Joseph's smile faltered. "A client offered 800. 800? You spent 2 weeks on that. You could earn that in 2 days if you just—" She stopped herself, realizing her words sounded too sharp. Joseph's expression hardened. "If I just what?" "Chased money instead of making something real." The silence between them was heavier than the oak cabinet. Vacations became another point of tension. Rosaline wanted to travel, to Italy, to Greece, to cities she had seen only in magazines. Joseph suggested road trips, camping, and local getaways. "Why spend thousands when we can make memories here?" he asked. She tried to agree, but deep down, she longed for more. Their friends noticed the strain too. At dinners, Rosaline's colleagues would talk about promotions, investments, and travel, while Joseph quietly sipped his drink, offering little to the conversation. Some nights, Rosaline avoided introducing him altogether, afraid he wouldn't fit into her world. Yet despite the conflicts, there were moments that pulled her back to him. Nights when he would hold her hand during a movie, mornings when he brewed her favorite coffee just the way she liked it, evenings when they cooked together and laughed until the food went cold. She loved him, but she also felt trapped, torn between admiration for his simplicity and frustration with his lack of ambition. The breaking point came one Saturday afternoon. Rosaline had been invited to a client's gallery opening, a high-profile event where she could make important connections. She asked Joseph to come. "I don't belong at those kinds of things," he said, wiping sawdust from his hands. "Joseph, it's not about belonging. It's about supporting me. I do support you. But walking into a room full of people who only care about how much money you make? That's not me." Rosaline's voice cracked. "So you can't even show up for me?" The argument escalated until she stormed out, attending the event alone. As she stood in the gallery surrounded by wealthy clients and polished conversations, she couldn't shake the image of Joseph alone in his workshop, hands stained with wood polish. She felt both guilty and resentful. By the time she returned home, Joseph was asleep on the couch, the television humming faintly. She covered him with a blanket and sat quietly, staring at him. She wondered if love was enough to bridge the gap between their worlds. Weeks later, she got the opportunity to test that very question. A new client approached her firm, a billionaire investor named Julian Croft, known for funding bold design projects across the city. Rosaline was ecstatic. Winning him over could be the highlight of her career. During their first meeting, Julian admired her ideas but frowned at the execution. "You need someone who can bring this vision to life physically," he said. "Do you know a craftsman? Someone who can handle detail with precision." Rosaline hesitated, then thought of Joseph. Despite her frustrations, his work was extraordinary. She found herself saying, "Yes, I know someone." Joseph was reluctant when she brought it up. "Rosaline, I don't want to get tangled up in your world of billionaires and boardrooms." But she insisted. "Just this once. Show them what you can do. Please." After days of persuasion, Joseph agreed. Neither of them had any idea how much that decision would change everything. The day of the presentation arrived faster than Rosaline expected. Julian Croft's office was perched on the top floor of a glass tower overlooking the Chicago River, sleek and intimidating. For Rosaline, this project could mean a major step forward in her career. For Joseph, it was just another job he reluctantly agreed to take. As they rode the elevator together, Rosaline straightened her blazer, rehearsing her pitch silently. Joseph stood beside her in a clean shirt and dark jeans, clearly uncomfortable in the corporate setting. She caught herself wishing he had worn a suit, but reminded herself this wasn't about appearances. It was about skill. Inside Croft's office, the atmosphere was sharp and deliberate. Modern art lined the walls, and an entire wall of glass revealed the city skyline. Julian Croft himself, tall, silver-haired, with a commanding presence, greeted Rosaline with a firm handshake. "This is the designer I told you about," Julian said to his assistant. "And this is?" Rosaline stepped forward. "This is Joseph Evans, a carpenter. He'll handle the custom woodwork for the installation." Julian turned his gaze on Joseph. For a moment, his expression shifted, not the polite smile he had given Rosaline, but a look of recognition. He froze, then extended his hand slowly. "Joseph Evans," Julian said, his tone measured. "It's been a long time." Rosaline blinked. "You know each other?" Joseph's jaw tightened. "We've met." Julian's demeanor changed instantly. The commanding tone softened into something closer to deference. He leaned back, studying Joseph with new respect. "I didn't realize you were still working hands-on." Rosaline looked between them, confused. "Wait, I thought." Joseph cut her off. "We should focus on the project." The rest of the meeting was strange. Rosaline presented her designs, but Julian seemed distracted, occasionally glancing at Joseph as though weighing an unspoken truth. When Joseph finally spoke, offering a few measured suggestions about the installation, Julian nodded as if each word carried unusual weight. By the end, Julian stood and clasped Joseph's hand again. "I'll have my office contact you directly. It's good to see you." Rosaline walked out of the building in silence, her mind racing. When they reached the street, she finally stopped. "Joseph," she said, turning to face him, "what was that?" He adjusted the strap of his tool bag. "It was nothing. Let's get home." "Don't do that," she snapped. "Julian Croft treated you like you were his equal. Not just a carpenter. Who are you, really?" Joseph met her gaze for a long moment, then looked away. "I told you, I'm just a man who builds things." But Rosaline couldn't let it go. She replayed every detail of the meeting in her head, the way Julian's tone shifted, the way Joseph avoided her eyes, the tension that hung in the air. None of it added up. Over the next week, she noticed more signs. Clients who came to the workshop sometimes recognized Joseph's name, their eyes widening slightly before masking it with a polite nod. He dismissed it each time. "They must be thinking of someone else," he'd say. But the consistency of their reactions gnawed at her. One evening, Rosaline decided to confront him directly. She found Joseph in the workshop, smoothing the surface of a mahogany table. The warm light caught the sharp lines of his face, calm as ever. "Joseph," she began, "I need the truth. Why did Julian Croft look at you like that? Why do people react when they hear your name?" Joseph didn't look up from the table. Rosaline, please drop this. No, she said firmly. I married you. I deserve to know who you really are. For the first time, frustration cracked his calm exterior. He slammed the sander onto the workbench. I told you already, I'm just Joseph. That should be enough. Her chest tightened. It's not enough when everyone else seems to know more about you than I do. The silence that followed was unbearable. He finally exhaled and ran a hand through his hair, but instead of answering, he walked past her, leaving the workshop. Rosaline stood alone, the smell of sawdust sharp in her nose, her heart pounding with a mix of fear and anger. A few days later, everything came to a head at a follow-up meeting with Croft. This time, Rosaline noticed the assistants whispering when Joseph entered the room. She heard one murmur, "Is that him?" before falling silent under his gaze. During the meeting, Croft once again addressed Joseph directly, almost ignoring Rosaline's presence. "Your insight is invaluable, Evans," he said. "If you ever decide to return, the doors are open." "Return to what?" Rosaline blurted out. The room went still. Croft glanced at Joseph, then back at her. "You really don't know, do you?" Rosaline felt her stomach drop. "Know what?" Joseph's face hardened. "Enough," he said sharply, standing. But Croft smiled faintly, ignoring his protest. "Rosaline, your husband isn't just a carpenter. He's Joseph Evans. The same Joseph Evans who built Evans Capital into one of the largest private investment firms in the country. He walked away from it all years ago. And now he's here." The words hit Rosaline like a physical blow. She turned to Joseph, searching his face. He didn't deny it. He only looked at her with quiet resignation. "I wanted a simple life," he said finally, his voice low. "I didn't want that world anymore." Rosaline's throat tightened, anger and disbelief colliding inside her. "You lied to me. You let me believe you were someone else. You let me." Joseph reached for her hand, but she pulled away. The silence between them felt colder than the glass tower they stood in. For the first time, Rosaline realized her marriage was built on a secret far bigger than she could have imagined. Rosaline barely remembered the drive home after the confrontation in Croft's office. Her mind spun in fragments. Joseph Evans, founder, billion-dollar companies. None of it matched the man she thought she had married, the man who spent hours sanding wood in a dim workshop. That night, their apartment felt unbearably small. She sat at the kitchen table, arms folded tightly across her chest, while Joseph stood by the window, silent. The tension between them pressed down heavier than any argument they had ever had. Finally, she broke the silence. "Tell me everything. No more hiding." Joseph turned slowly, his face calm but weary. He pulled out a chair across from her and sat down. For a long moment, he just looked at her, as though deciding whether she could handle the truth. "My full name," he began, "is Joseph Alexander Evans. I founded a venture capital firm called Epic Ventures when I was 26. We were early investors in several companies you'd recognize: Aurora Biotech, Horizon Mobility, Green Grid Energy. Each of those grew into billion-dollar corporations. My name was in every business magazine, every tech conference, every interview. For a while, people treated me like I was untouchable." Rosaline's stomach knotted. She had heard of those companies. They were giants, reshaping industries. Joseph continued. "But the more successful we became, the more I hated it. Investors stopped caring about ideas that mattered. All they wanted was the next payday. Founders came to me with dreams, and my partners would crush them if the profit margins weren't big enough. I watched people burn out, sell out, or tear themselves apart chasing numbers. And somewhere in the middle of it all, I realized I had become part of the same machine. His voice lowered. So I walked away. I sold my shares, stepped back from the public eye, and disappeared. The world assumed I retired, but the truth is, I wanted my life back. Carpentry gave me that. Working with wood, creating something I could touch, it grounded me. It made me feel human again. Rosaline's hands trembled slightly against the table. So every time I asked why you didn't want more, you already had it. More than anyone could imagine. Joseph nodded. Yes. But it didn't make me happy. I didn't tell you because I wanted to be sure you saw me, not the headlines or the bank account. I thought I was protecting what we had. She stared at him, struggling to process. The man she had believed was a simple carpenter was, in truth, someone who had shaped industries. The betrayal stung, but so did the realization that he had been carrying this alone. "Do you still have money?" she asked finally, her voice sharper than intended. His lips pressed into a thin line. "Enough. Investments, properties, trust. I live modestly because I choose to, not because I have to." Rosaline let out a shaky laugh, half angry, half disbelieving. "So while I've been worrying about bills and vacations, you've been, what? Pretending we couldn't afford more." Joseph's eyes softened. "I wasn't pretending. I wanted us to live a life free of that noise. A life where love wasn't measured by dollar signs." Her chest ached at his words, torn between admiration and fury. "But you lied," she whispered. "You let me build an entire marriage on half the truth." Joseph leaned forward, his voice steady. "I didn't lie about us. Every moment we've shared, every word I've spoken to you, that was real. The only thing I kept from you was a past I didn't want to define me anymore." Rosaline looked away, blinking hard. The truth was overwhelming, a storm of emotions crashing against one another. Betrayal, confusion, awe, anger, even a sliver of respect. She had married Joseph to prove something to herself and to Chad, but now she realized Joseph had married her hoping to prove something too, that he could be loved for himself, not his wealth. The silence stretched, heavy and raw. Finally, Joseph stood. "I'll give you space tonight." He walked toward the bedroom, pausing in the doorway. "But Rosaline, no matter what you decide, I need you to know I never stopped being myself around you. I just hoped my past wouldn't matter." When the door clicked shut behind him, Rosaline pressed her palms to her face. Her world had shifted in a single conversation. The man she thought she understood was a stranger, and yet, somehow, still the man she loved. Rosaline barely slept that night. She lay awake, staring at the ceiling, every word Joseph had spoken echoing in her head. Joseph Evans. Epic Ventures. Billion-dollar companies. It was as though she had married a stranger. In the gray light of dawn, she slipped quietly out of bed, leaving Joseph still asleep, and sat at the dining table with her laptop. Curiosity warred with anger as she typed his full name into the search bar. Instantly, page after page filled her screen: interviews, Forbes covers, photos from tech conferences where Joseph, clean-shaven and wearing tailored suits, stood flanked by powerful people she recognized. Her breath caught as she clicked through. There he was, smiling confidently, shaking hands with CEOs, speaking on panels about the future of innovation. This was not the quiet carpenter who sanded wood for hours. This was someone who once commanded boardrooms and influenced entire industries. Yet, as she studied his face in those photos, she noticed something. His smile never quite reached his eyes. The sharp confidence looked almost forced, as though he was playing a role. the man sleeping in their bedroom, the man who loved coffee at sunrise and simple evenings, looked more genuine than this polished version ever had. Her emotions tangled tighter. Betrayal gnawed at her, but another truth crept in: she wasn't innocent either. She had married Joseph out of anger, out of rebellion against Chad's cruel dismissal. Had she been fully honest with herself? Memories of that night with Chad surfaced sharply. His words, "No ordinary man will ever understand your tastes," had cut her pride. Her marriage to Joseph had been her way of proving Chad wrong. She had told herself it was about love, but deep down it had also been about revenge. Tears welled in her eyes. She realized she hadn't entered their marriage with pure intentions either. She had judged Joseph by his simplicity just as Chad had judged her by her ambition. Both men had become mirrors of her own insecurities. When Joseph walked into the room later that morning, wearing his usual flannel shirt and carrying 2 mugs of coffee, she felt an ache in her chest. He looked at her cautiously, setting 1 cup in front of her. "I wasn't sure if you'd still want this," he said softly. Rosaline wrapped her hands around the warm mug, but didn't drink. "Why didn't you trust me with the truth?" He sat across from her, his posture heavy with regret. "Because every time someone has known, they treated me differently. Either they wanted something from me or they resented me. I was tired of being defined by money. I thought if I kept that part of my life away, I could finally be seen for who I am." Her throat tightened. "But don't you see? By hiding it, you never gave me the chance to prove I could love you for you." Silence filled the space. Rosaline's heart thudded as another realization hit her. She had been so busy questioning his honesty that she hadn't confronted her own. "Joseph," she whispered, "I need to tell you something too. When I said yes to marrying you, I wasn't just saying yes because I was in love. I was angry. I wanted to prove something to Chad, and maybe even to myself. I thought choosing someone simple meant I was choosing real love. But maybe I was still playing a game." Joseph's expression softened, though pain lingered in his eyes. "So we both built this marriage on half-truths." Rosaline nodded slowly, tears slipping down her cheeks. "I judged you for being too simple, when the truth is, you were choosing peace over performance. And I wasn't honest about why I rushed into this marriage. Maybe we both failed to trust each other with our full selves." For the first time since the revelation, Joseph reached across the table and took her hand. His palm was warm, steady. "Then maybe this is where we start. With honesty. With no more masks." Her chest loosened as his words sank in. It wasn't forgiveness yet, but it was the first step toward it. Rosaline sipped her coffee finally, her voice quiet but firm. "I don't care about the money, Joseph. What I care about is whether we can rebuild this on truth. Because if we can't, none of it matters." Joseph squeezed her hand gently. "Then let's rebuild. From here." For the first time since the revelation, Rosaline felt a flicker of hope. A week passed before Joseph invited Rosaline to see the side of his world he had kept hidden. They drove to Boulder in his old truck, the same one that always smelled faintly of sawdust, but this time he wasn't taking her to a carpentry workshop. They pulled up in front of a modern office building with glass walls that reflected the snow-capped peaks beyond. A modest sign read "Epic Ventures." Rosaline's chest tightened as she realized she was standing at the heart of the empire Joseph had once walked away from. Inside, the atmosphere was buzzing, but not in the overwhelming corporate way she had expected. There were open spaces filled with greenery, teams huddled over laptops, whiteboards scribbled with bold ideas. Young founders, diverse, passionate, spoke with excitement about renewable energy, sustainable farming, accessible healthcare technology. Joseph greeted them not as a distant investor but as a mentor. She watched him sit with a team of college graduates pitching a solar-powered water system. He asked thoughtful questions, not about profit margins but about impact. How many rural families could this serve in its first year? Rosaline felt a strange warmth bloom inside her. This wasn't the world of power-hungry billionaires she had imagined. It was purposeful, grounded in values she hadn't expected Joseph to carry so deeply. As they walked through the building together, Joseph glanced at her, reading her expression carefully. "This is why I left the spotlight," he said. "I realized wealth only meant something if it built more than ego. These founders remind me of why I started in the first place, because ideas can change lives, not just line pockets." Rosaline slowed her pace, taking it all in. "You've been funding dreams, quietly, while I was busy resenting you for living simply." He gave a rueful smile. "And I resented myself for not telling you. I thought if you knew this side, it would ruin the peace I found in being ordinary. But maybe the truth is both sides matter. The carpenter and the investor." They stopped by a wall where framed photos hung, young entrepreneurs holding up their first prototypes, communities celebrating new projects, villages in Africa where solar lights replaced darkness. Rosaline stared at the images. For the first time, ambition didn't feel like vanity. It felt like service. And for the first time, she realized how shallow her definition of success had been, measured by titles, by the approval of people like Chad. She turned to Joseph, emotion thick in her voice. "All this time, I thought you lacked ambition. But you've been living a kind of ambition I never understood. Purpose-driven. Impactful." Joseph reached for her hand. "And I thought you couldn't love me unless I hid who I was. But maybe you needed the truth to see me clearly." Her chest swelled with something she hadn't felt in months: pride. Not the pride of proving Chad wrong, but pride in the man she had married, because he was both humble and extraordinary, without needing to flaunt it. That evening, back at their lodge, Rosaline sat across from Joseph by the fireplace. The flames flickered softly as she spoke. "I don't want us to build a marriage on rebellion or secrets anymore. I want it to be about choice, our choice. Not Chad, not appearances, not fear. Just us." Joseph's gaze held hers steadily. "Then let's choose each other. Fully this time. No more halves." For the first time since his revelation, Rosaline's heart settled. The weight of betrayal hadn't vanished, but something stronger had begun to take its place. Trust, slowly but surely rebuilt, brick by brick. Snowflakes clung to the windshield as Joseph guided the truck along a winding road in Colorado. Rosaline leaned against the seat, gazing out at endless forests dusted in white. The tension that had gripped her for weeks felt lighter here, softened by the mountains stretching into the horizon. They finally stopped at a cabin tucked near the base of the Maroon Bells. It wasn't grand, just timber walls, a stone chimney, and a porch facing the peak. Yet, as Rosaline stepped out into the crisp air, she felt something she hadn't felt in months: stillness. Inside, the cabin smelled of cedar and old books. A small wood-burning stove hummed as Joseph placed fresh logs inside. He handed Rosaline a mug of hot cocoa, and for a while they sat in silence, listening to the wind push against the windows. Joseph broke it first. "This place saved me after I walked away from the business world. Out here, I remembered what mattered: simple work, quiet mornings, making things with my hand. I wanted to bring you here because I need you to see both parts of me. Not just the man who builds companies, not just the man who builds tables, but both. Rosaline traced her fingers over the rim of the mug, absorbing his words. And I need to admit something too, she said. I didn't marry you for the right reasons at first. I wanted to prove something to Chad, to myself. But somewhere along the way you stopped being a rebellion. You became my choice. Even when I was angry, even when I doubted, you were still the one I wanted to come home to. Joseph reached across the small table, his hand covering hers. Then let's stop running from who we are. No more masks. No more half-truths. Later that evening, they walked outside beneath a sky scattered with stars. The peaks loomed quiet and watchful. Rosaline tucked herself into Joseph's arms, the cold forgotten. For the first time in a long time, the future didn't scare her. They spoke of what life could look like. Fewer grand gestures, more shared mornings. His firm continuing to back meaningful ventures. Her design career refocused on projects that inspired her instead of impressing others. Success no longer felt like a performance, it felt like alignment. Rosaline looked up at Joseph, her voice steady. Let's write a new story. Not built on appearances, not on rebellion. Built on truth. He kissed her forehead, whispering, "That's all I've ever wanted." As the fire from the cabin glowed behind them and the mountains stood in quiet witness, Rosaline finally understood. She hadn't just married a carpenter. She hadn't just married a billionaire. She had chosen a partner willing to strip away the illusions of both worlds and start again with her. Would you choose love and authenticity over wealth and status? Share your thoughts in the comments, and let us know where you're watching from. Don't forget to subscribe for more powerful stories. We have another one coming tomorrow you won't want to miss. Your support means the world to us and helps us keep bringing you these inspiring stories.